keeping that on your radar as well. But George Strait, She'll Leave You with a Smile, is one of Jay's many hits. She Don't Love Me, but She Don't Hate Me Anymore is one of my all-time favorites. Is a Jay written song that Billy Ray Cyrus cut. Did someone else cut that?
Trent Wellman recorded it
That's right.
back when he was trying to be a singing star instead of a record producer.
Yeah, Trent Wellman. I had to text him the other day. I was like, yo, is this still you? And he was like, yo, it is. Anyway, love Trent Wellman. But yeah, Billy Ray Cyrus did She Don't Love You. She Don't Love Me, but She Don't Hate Me Anymore. Luke Bryan cuts, Jack Ingram cuts, just an incredible career that you've had. So everyone welcome Jay Knowles, who is sitting in his writing space across town. And I'm so happy to have him today. And so we're going to get started with the conversation. Please feel free to write down some questions, because toward the end, in about 35-40 minutes, I want to open it up and get some of your questions. So with that, Jay, welcome.
Well, thank you.
And thanks for being here. Thanks for giving up some time on a Sunday. But let's just start back at a history lesson for everyone. Tell me the history of Jay Knowles, and then at the end of that question, why Nashville?
Okay. I think in a way, the beginning of the question is the end of the question. Also, for me, my dad is a guitar player. Well, I was born in Dallas, but when I was about 5 or so, my dad had met Chet Atkins, who I don't know if you're not familiar with Nashville stuff. Chet Atkins is one of the great guitar players of all time. He was also a record producer, and he ran RCA Records for a while, and kind of one of the architects of the Nashville sound. And but is also my dad's hero. And so my dad met Chet, and we came to Nashville when I was about 6 at Chet's urging. And I went over to Chet's office one day, and my dad, to back it up, my dad and I had written one song together called the Gorilla Song. It was just a thing that we'd done sort of as a family activity, where I said, I want to write a song about a gorilla and a banana. And so we would just kind of write this song while we were riding around or doing stuff. We would write on this song and make new verses of it just for fun. And one day I went over to Chet's office with my dad, because we were just dropping stuff off, and Shel Silverstein was there. And I knew who Shel Silverstein was. I didn't do two craps about Chet Atkins, but I knew who Shel Silverstein was from the back of the book covers. And because I had a lot more chutzpah as a 6-year-old than I do as a 52-year-old, I said, "Hey, Dad, why don't we play Chet and Shel our song?" And so we did. We played him the Gorilla Song, and then Chet said, I just heard this story recently from my dad for the first time. That's why it's kind of fun to me. Chet said to my dad, said to me, "That's really good. Why don't you do it again?" And Chet recorded me playing that song just on his little cassette player he had in his office. So I guess technically that was my first Nashville demo. But and then strangely enough, like 15, 20 years later, Raffi recorded that song through a series of things. So really the first song I ever wrote was one of the first songs I ever got recorded. It took me about 500 more to get to my second one. So, it was a kind of a lucky moment. But I just grew up around music and around guitars and things, and always knew I wanted to be a writer of some kind. I thought I wanted to be a book writer or a short story writer, a real writer, as my grandmother would call it. But I was kind of drawn back to Nashville after I went to college up in Connecticut, and was drawn back to Nashville just because it seemed like it was a thing that was happening. That was probably late 80s, early 90s. And there was a lot of cool, interesting things to me happening in Nashville. There was, in addition just to kind of straight Nashville country music, which I was a big fan of, like Alan Jackson and Randy Travis and those people, but I was also a fan of Mary Chapin Carpenter and Emmylou Harris and that kind of strain of Nashville stuff. and all the rock guys who I thought were cool at the time, whether it was Mark Knopfler or Niccolo, and those guys all thought Nashville was cool too. That was Costello. So I thought Nashville was the place to be, and I was like, shoot, I'm from here. So I came here and after college and started waiting tables and pulling weeds and writing songs and standing in line at the Bluebird to get, to do the thing where you get to play 1.5 songs for Amy at the time it was back then. And I've
Right.
just been kind of doing it ever since.
So which song was your first cut outside of your Chet Atkins demo that you have?
Yeah. The first kind of real like Nashville cut was a song that my friend Win Varble and I wrote called Self-Made Man. That he and I wrote it. And Montgomery Gentry was a band back then, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, country act, and they recorded it, and it was a single. And it's funny, that song, again, this is just sort of a little piece of the heartbreak of Nashville. It was supposed to be my first Brooks and Dunn cut, and Wynn's friend Daryl Worley, who ended up becoming a singer himself, was in the studio with Brooks and Dunn because he first through his things and like called us up on not the cell phone because there was no cell phones. Called us up and was like, I'm sitting here looking at your song, Brooks and Dunn. They charted it out. They're going to record it next. And then through a series of events, they ended up not recording it. But then about a year later, they Montgomery Gentry did, and it was on the radio. It was a minor. It was in the top 20 or something like that. Made enough money to help get me out of the hole and kind of halfway buy a real live house.
So were you at Warner at the time?
I was at a company called Little Big Town.
Oh, okay, Little Big Town.
Which is what that.
And was Win was
Win was wrote for Reba McEntire's company.
Okay, Starstruck.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was funny. Like when I was first getting started, the company I was at, I was the only sort of first deal writer at my company. Everybody else was like, there's guys like Bob DePiro was there, and John Scott Sherrill, and Steve Seskin, and Kathy Majeski, all these people who were like, to me, like the people whose songs I'd listened to. So I learned a lot from them, but there was no one for me to sort of be a freshman with. And Starstruck, where Reba was, had a lot of kind of freshman writers. And so Win was one of those, and a bunch of other friends. So I used to hang out more at Reba's place because there was a bunch of us who were still just kind of figuring out how this thing even worked, and how to behave like a real life songwriter and stuff like that.
So I know how important those days were to me. Mm-hmm. How important were those freshman days for you to find the people that you really connected and fit with?
Yeah, that was like so crucial to all of it. Woody Bomar, who was my first publisher, I'm sure you know Woody.
I worked for Woody a couple of years ago.
Okay, yeah, and the one sort of grand service, long-term service he did to me, short-term disservice possibly, is he said, I was 23, 24, which was really young back then to have a deal. Now, especially for someone who doesn't look fancy in jeans and doesn't sing good. I was just a guy who had some weird songs. And Woody was like, if I wanted to, I could hook you up to write with all these guys who were like the hit writers of the time and make all these things. And you could probably have some cuts and some stuff on the radio right away. He said, but I'm afraid then, because you're so young and malleable, that it would be 1995, but you'd be learning how to write songs in 1985. Right. And I want you to learn how to write songs in 2005. Right. So you need to hang out with your people. And I wrote with Bob a couple times, and I wrote with John Scott. I wrote with the big guys a little bit just to see what that looked like at that level. But for the most part, it was me and Win, a guy named Odie Blackman, who I wrote the George Strait song with. My buddy Trent Summer, I met him through that time. A guy named Jerry Boonstra. You remember Doak Sneed? He passed away recently, but those were my friends, and we just kind of got in there and were like, how do you do this part? Who's this? And what's a demo? How do you hide? And we could ask each other these questions and be wrong in front of each other in a way that because there was so little at stake.
Mhm.
And a lot of those guys have moved or don't live here anymore. Some of them, Casey Beathard was one of them. They're like big time dudes now. But
Mhm.
at the time, we were just all a bunch of dopes trying to figure it out together, and it was a lot of fun.
Because one of the things I bring up often is I have a crew like that too. My early days with
Hmm.
Connie Harrington, Brett Beavers,
Hmm.
Roxy Dean, and
Uh-huh.
we all kind of grew up together. And I would get opportunities to like write with Don Slitz, who wrote,
Hmm.
The Gambler and things like that. And it was just never quite the same because when I would go in like the student, I
Hmm.
wrote differently than when I went in as a partner.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you have to dare to suck. You have to come in confidence blaring and yet willing to be malleable to what's going on. And when someone is, I mean, Don Slitz is already in the Hall of Fame, and
Right.
I walk in and haven't barely had a cut under my belt. So I just anything he said, I wasn't going to push back on because he knew what he was talking about.
Right. Yep.
But when I got in the room with somebody that I was willing um, to push on a little bit, I found that we got better songs.
Hmm.
So talk about strengths and weaknesses, and I don't want to go too far down these
Hmm.
roads, but
Hmm.
strengths and weaknesses, like where do you feel like you land on that triangle? Lyric, melody, production. Like, are you a concept guy? I know you write alone a lot, so you kind of
Hmm.
have all of those parts. But where is your strength, and where do you look for people to fit with you?
I think for me, the thing I'm probably best at is kind of uh is well, two things. One is like individual, like using words interestingly, like
Mhm.
word play, but not necessarily word like fancy word play, just where it is both interesting to hear, but also just sounds like somebody talking.
Right,
Like when I do my thing well, it's both of those at the same
right,
time.
right.
But the other thing I'm pretty good at is sort of the up above view of a song and pretty quickly going, oh, if this is what it's going to do, then this is what needs to happen through the course of the song. And so I'm more than some folks, I can kind of write the bridge and the second verse and the chorus and the first verse. To me, those are all sort of happening simultaneously.
Mhm.
And I can kind of see all of those different parts and how they're affecting each other. That's just years and years of doing this. Those are
Right,
probably
right.
like melodically, I'm very good at doing a very specific kind of
Mhm.
melodical thing that I like, but
Right.
I really like writing with melody people and musical people who don't think like I do, because that's very exciting to me. I'm like, oh, why did you do it? Oh, yeah. Oh, and every time if I'm writing with someone and I have a hard time playing it or remembering it, that makes me excited because it means that I'm not on one of my ruts.
Right.
It means that someone else is doing it.
Because we talk about muscle memory, we grab a guitar and we go to
Mhm.
the same chord structures. We
Yep.
go because it's easiest,
Yep.
and we've kind of gotten into, but you like for somebody to kind of push you out of that
To make
rut a
me
little
feel,
bit.
yeah, like, oh man, every time I keep accidentally going to the four, it's because that's my rut. But,
Right,
but really, this song goes to the five. Oh, okay, got
right,
it, got it, got it. And then
right.
like, maybe that becomes a new rut for
That's
me.
yeah, that's cool. And because I feel that putting teams together, and I'm going to echo Woody Beaumont because
Hmm.
I do think writing with your class,
Hmm.
finding people that are kind of experience wise and writing wise, you're a little bit similar
Hmm.
because then you grow together.
Yeah.
And I don't find many people solo writing who grow as fast as you can when you have a team around you
Yep.
that are, when I met Roxy Dean and Amy Dowley and some of the Lee Miller, some of
Hmm.
these people they had a thing, and I met them and started kind of stepping into their thing. My growth was like just exponentially because I was always a solo writer.
Yeah.
I moved to town because I didn't have anyone in Austin, Texas that could write with me or that would write with me. And so when I got here, I was still writing by myself. And then I met a guy named Troy Johnson who just was
Hmm.
like, a melody guy, and
Yeah.
this great voice. And so then I got to be the screenwriter. I got to write the words that I wanted him to say,
Right.
because I love the texture of his voice. So do you find that you really lean into, I know Odie, I adore him, and Win Varble is just like one of the best. And, your co-writer selection is phenomenal. And I always look at a group of people like that, knowing that all of your collaborators are phenomenal, which leads me to believe that you are one of the most phenomenal writers we have, because you have learned how to write alone, but yet still surround yourself with people that are equally as amazing. Because speak to ego, speak to
Mhm.
walking in a room with a Casey Beathard, like Alan Shamblin is probably a guy that I put way, way up on a ship. He and
Yep.
Tom Douglas.
Yep.
And but when we walk into rooms with those kind of people in it, we have to bring something, or else why are we there?
Mhm.
So speak to that moment of walking into a room with someone that has the skill set that you just outlined. What is the thought process that you go through in those moments of, like, not being overly humble, but not being overly arrogant, but finding a place for your opinions and your thoughts and your viewpoint?
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny we talk about like um I'll back up to the first part you think you said, then I'll get to that. One is like I think the writing by yourself part, almost like initially, like I said, I wrote by myself initially, and then I wrote by myself a bunch early on. But then once I got sucked into the co-writing land, I stopped for about 10 years and I forgot how to do it. And it wasn't until I was back at Warner that I was like, okay, I need to start doing this again. And I just started setting aside one, and I had to like reteach myself
Mhm.
how to do it again. And I did it, and then I forgot again, and I relearned it about 10 years ago or so is when I really started kind of writing by myself a lot. And it was because I didn't feel like I was being of service in
Right.
a co-writing situation because I had too much stuff I wanted to get out of my own. And so if I was writing with someone who was really good, I wasn't taking advantage of them. Uh, if I was writing with someone who was not as skilled, I could bully them into what I wanted, or just use them as sort of like a cheerleader. So just have somebody say, "Man, Jay, you're great. Man, Jay, you're great," and that's not really what I need. I need somebody to say, "Man, Jay, that's not quite it. Man, Jay, that's not quite it." Um, and so I wrote a bunch by myself, uh, so I could just finish getting all these things done that I needed to get done. And so that when I got back in the room with Win or somebody like that, or somebody like Shamblin, who's like way like, yeah, I agree with you, like that's the thing. Like I would feel like I had to the thing to your question, like I could show up being confident in my skill set, but mostly there to listen.
Mhm.
And to me, that's really the thing that I've gotten better at as I've gotten older is I don't need any individual song to be the story of my life,
Right.
or because in a way, they always end up being the story of my life anyway.
Mhm.
Uh, but I just want it to be our song
Right.
as best as it can be.
Right.
And that's the thing that I've learned from writing by myself. I learned how to do that almost more writing by myself at a certain point than co-writing.
Mhm.
And so now when I get in a room with whether it's somebody like Shamlin of that nature who I get shaky just even like thinking about writing
Right.
with, or it's somebody who's like, oh, my publisher sent me with this kid and they just showed up in town, but they might have a record deal or they had a thing on TikTok or whatever. Like same thing. Like I just show up to listen because there's a reason why they're there. What is the reason why they're there? What are the things? Where are the gaps in their skills that my skills can fit and learn from? And so that's the main. To me, that's uh, the main thing I show up, whether it's somebody new or somebody who I've been around with a long time, is
Right.
just to start listening to them, and then just go. Also,
Mhm.
I don't. if I know if I'm listening, then I also don't need to hold back. Um, Although there are times where, like, just because I've been doing this for a long time, when I can be really fast and I
Right.
can go, oh, what if the second verse is this? And you can tell somebody who's newer, they're like, whoa, 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 buddy, buddy, buddy. I'm like, okay, sorry, sorry, sorry. Maybe I need to keep that in my pocket for a minute and let you find
Mhm.
your way through the song and go at your speed. And it's not about fast, slow, good, bad. It's just about um, making sure that you don't get ahead of everyone or behind. You're always just sort of, so you're always listening and always aware of what the other person thinks the song should be. I don't know. Is that
Yeah, that's amazing. I wrote down a ton of that. Would you say that respect is something that has to exist? Young writer that's an artist that has a TikTok, all the way to Alan Shamblin. I find that if I go in and I don't have a full amount of respect for what it is they're bringing into the room,
Mhm.
we don't have a good day. Speak
Yeah.
to that. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe that's why I needed to start writing by myself several years ago. Is that because sometimes I would show up with a kind of a crappy attitude a little bit and be like, "Oh, here we go," and I've lost a lot of that mostly because, like you say, it doesn't help.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's a kid I wrote with early on in Zoom times a bunch, and we still have not met in real life, I don't think,
Right.
but I know if we had, I'd have been like, "Oh, there's one of those kids with a thing and a thing," and he would have been like, "Oh, there's that old man who reads too many books or whatever." And but because we didn't have a lot of those kind of markers, I realized, oh, he's got this way of talking that is so weird, and
Mhm.
I don't know what half these words he's using even mean. So basically, the way we would write is I would say, we need the song to say this. How do you say that?
Right.
And he goes, oh, I'd say, "Burp, burp, 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 burp." And I was like, okay, that's going in our song. I don't
Right.
know what it means, but so it became, we really had a lot of fun sort of translating, you know, the me to him world, and we're kind of pals in a weird way because of that. Because like I said, that's what you find is, what is it? What is it? There's no one is not here for a reason.
Right.
Everybody has their thing that has brought them to this party. And so, what is it?
Right.
And like I say,
I yeah.
when you're like us, you've been doing it for a long time, I can kind of do all of it, but I don't want to do all of it because if I do, then it's just one of my dumb songs.
Right.
If I let you do all of it and I just kind of become the caulk and the thing and the help and the oh, and that's oh, but if you have one of these, this
Mhm.
is what you need. And that's what I saw, a long time ago when I read DePiro years ago. I saw him be like, oh, and this is what I learned from writing above myself early on, uh, is that when Bob gets to a fork in the road, he knows which one to take
Right.
every time because he's gone down the wrong one so many times
Right.
and the right one so many times. We would get these forks, and I know if it was me and Odie at the time, we'd have been like, "Oh gosh, how do we do this?" He'd just go like, "Oh, we'll just say blah blah blah," and I'd be like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, that's it."
Right.
But you know,
Right. I love Bob DePiro, one of the most instinctive writers ever. I
yeah,
agree with you. I think well, I always do this. I've got a whole list of questions, but I'm getting toward the end of time and
oh Lord,
uh uh I want to play a song that Jay says is his favorite song that hasn't been cut. And I'm going to play a verse and chorus of it, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you want to put in the chat a question, I'll be able to pick out a couple of questions. So put in the chat a question, or just put in that you want to ask a question, and then you can ask it out loud if you would like. Just be respectful of time. But this is a song I ask you, of all the cuts that you had, and you pointed me to a song that you said was your favorite song that had not been cut. So I'm going to share my screen and my sound, and I'm going to pull up here to Spotify. And it's called Stop and Grow the Roses. So we're going to play a bit of that. And you can also find Jay Knowles on Apple, Spotify, all of the music platforms. He has put out some amazing music of his own. But here is Jay in Stop and Grow the Roses.
Sometimes it just takes a call in the middle of the day. Just thinking of you is all I have to say. Sometimes a dozen daisies will say I love you so. She knows it, but sometimes you've got to stop and grow the roses. You've got to dig a little hole, plant a little seed on every garden. Start with just some dirt and a dream, yeah. Takes a little work, takes a little while till I can pick her one, give her one, and make her smile. But that look, that laugh, that touch just goes to show it. Sometimes you've got to stop and grow the roses. Sometimes I take her out to dance, sometimes just for a drive. Sometimes I sit beside her so she knows I'm by her side. But I know the reason why we've survived all the highs and lows. Sometimes we just stop and grow the roses. You've got to dig a little hole, plant a little seed on every garden. Start with just some dirt and a dream, yeah. Takes a little work, takes a little while till I can pick her one, give her one, and make her smile. That look, that laugh, that touch just goes to show it. Sometimes you got to stop and grow the roses.